Okay, so good afternoon. Election Day is this upcoming Tuesday, and we are continuing our lunchtime discussion around politics and the pulpit. Thank you all for sending me some of your ideas and some of the sermons that have moved you. What I want to do today is, we're 6 days out from a rather contentious presidential election. And what I'm going to be doing after this class is I'm going to record a PSA, public service announcement, a video. My wife, I think, is going to shoot it. And I don't know if anybody here has ever seen those unboxing videos. Anybody ever see these unboxing videos that are all the rage on YouTube? So I'm going to unbox the ballot that the governor has sent to me, and we are going to create a voting plan, and then we're going to send that out to the community to encourage everyone to vote and to participate in the process. And I have a little bit of Torah, which I will include there around the significance to be part of what's happening in our world. But before we get into that and we talk a little bit about that, I want to discuss the controversy that happened after the inauguration of our current president. And this sort of rumbling that happened around whether or not rabbis or preachers should be talking about politics from the pulpit, and a little dispute broke out, a wonderfully halachic, Talmudic, L'Shem Shemayim argumentation broke out south of us in Los Angeles amongst some very prominent conservative rabbis. And what I'd like to do is look at the letters that they wrote to each other back and forth today and have a discussion about what we feel about them and how we might want to understand our role in what will be perhaps a new administration in 2021 or a second administration. Sandy, you had your hand raised.
I don't know what this unboxing piece was.
Yes. So that's me being a little cute. What I want to do is I want to create a sort of a little video to encourage everyone, remind them it's election day in case we've forgotten, and sort of how people can prepare to vote. And so along with my wife, we're going to, basically what people do is they order dresses or technology to their house. Like you get the new iPhone, the box arrives and people take a video of themselves opening up the box. Nice. And it's all the rage on YouTube. And I thought I could unbox the ballot.
Well, it's a little late.
Well, that's part of it, that we've learned that along the way. That's right. That's going to be part of the conversation. And I think a lot of people might be in my predicament, having not yet voted or prepared a voting plan. So yeah, absolutely.
Are you going to
all the more reason for the PSA, Sandy. So that's my intention.
So you haven't voted yet?
No, I have a habit of voting on election day.
Oh.
Are you going to mention that it's probably too late to mail in your ballot?
Correct. I am going to mention that it is too late to put it into the mailbox. But this wasn't the focus. The procedural conversation wasn't going to be the focus of this lunch study. We were, as much as we might want to discuss the procedures and the logistics around voting, and as significant as they are, we're creating a PSA for it. This lunch is to talk about the meta issues, the philosophy, the morals, the ethics, and what undergirds our commitment to life and to the world in which we live. And so let's begin. What I want to begin is I'm going to screen share first Rabbi Wolpe's piece, which was written in the Jewish Journal in June of 2011. Let me just screen share here 1 second. And I'm going to read it. I'll read it straight through, and then we'll discuss it. And then there are a number of replies from different rabbis, and we'll take a look at a couple of those. So why I keep politics off the pulpit? Rabbi David Wolpe. He is the rabbi at Temple Sinai in Los Angeles. Einstein often is credited with saying that there are two ways to live your life, as though everything is a miracle or as though nothing is a miracle. I'm tempted to believe the same thing about Judaism. There are two ways to be Jewish, as though everything is politics or as though nothing is politics. I'm endlessly besieged by requests to take on this or that political or social issue. After all, does not Judaism take a stand on virtually every aspect of life? If it is a left-wing cause, I will be rebuked for neglecting prophetic ethics, which is the guardian of the widow and the orphan and the climate and the transgendered. If it is a right-wing cause, I will be reminded of the primacy of peoplehood and objective moral law and the sanctity of unborn life and the free market. When the Torah counsels against being a talebearer, it is reminding us not to spread nasty rumors about Barack Obama or about Donald Trump. I've yet to hear that it prohibits both. And when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Israel, if you oppose the settlements, you are a self-hating denier of the triumph of Jewish history. If you support the settlements, you are a brutalizing occupier, unconcerned with the rights of others. If you see merit in both sides of the argument, you are a spineless equivocator. With each new presidential administration, the pressure grows greater. There was a time when a rabbi's heart would quake at the prospect of a Talmudic challenge. I know of a colleague who was stopped in an elevator by an older man who looked at him and said, "Shtar minyan," an old Talmudic question, asking him, how do we know that you can be betrothed with a document? When the colleague confessed his inadequacy, the older man said, you're no rabbi. Jews can be tough. But today the question is far more likely to be, what do you think of Trump? And whatever you answer, the response can be at least as cutting as the older man's elevator retort. The litmus test for religious legitimacy has become political opinion. In the pages of this very newspaper are those who will pronounce one side of the political debate the source of all our ills and therefore de facto un-Jewish. It is a sad and narrow conclusion from the tradition of argument, debate, and compromise. Yes, compromise. The rabbis praise compromise and recognize it as a great virtue. Each time you enter your house, it is exemplified by the mezuzah, which some thought should be horizontal and others vertical. It rests at an angled compromise. I know outstanding rabbis on the left of the political spectrum and others on the right. You can love Torah and vote for Trump. You can love Torah and think Trump is a blot on the American system. What you may not do, if you are intellectually honest, is say that the Torah points in only one political direction. So cut your rabbi some slack. Even better, learn to love people who differ with you on crucial matters. I won't take refuge in the dodge that each of you may be partly right, perhaps, but maybe one of you is flat out wrong. So you've never been wrong before? You've never changed your mind about something important? Must everyone you love, esteem, or befriend agree with your opinions as they are held today? All we hear all day long is politics. Can we not come to shul for something different, something deeper? I want to know what my rabbi thinks of Jacob and Rachel, not of Pence and Pelosi. Do not tie your Torah to this week's headlines. We are bigger, better, and deeper than that. Okay, reactions to David Wolpe. Irene. Oh, hold on. You got to unmute yourself.
I like it a lot.
Why?
Because I thought I knew exactly what was right. And then a friend of mine thought just the opposite. And I'm against Trump. And she, I thought, was my friend. And then I said, is my friendship beyond my opinion? And my answer was yes. So I learned to accept what I thought was totally irrational. But so beyond that, we are beyond that, I think.
Okay, thank you, Irene. Gary and then Sandy.
Okay, I think to be fair, you have to provide perspective of who these people are, and particularly in Rabbi Wolpe's case. First of all, he's the head of one of the largest and wealthiest conservative Jewish congregations. He's considered the highest paid rabbi, I believe, in all denominations. It's really interesting, and also his congregation is split something like 60% Ashkenazi and 40% Iranian. He is very well known for his sermon where he told them, look, this is ridiculous, we're all Jews, and that you cannot refuse to have your kids marry other parts of the congregation because they're not Iranian or Iraqi. And then at the same time he went on from there, he had a rebellion in his congregation when he started performing gay marriages, and he told the elderly Iranians that, look, I'm doing this, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it whether you like it or not. So it's interesting that he chose this time to come out with his positions, but he has a unique position and he has taken political stands before. So just for that clarification.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Gary. Sandy Edwards.
Well, I just don't think this is so clear cut because he isn't addressing the moral and the issues that are being raised. And I know he's done it before. So,
well, let me just keep going with you for a second. So, as I'm wont to do, he does say you can be a good Jew and vote for Trump. So, I mean, that to a certain extent, that's addressing a moral issue, no?
well, it's just who the person is as well as the issues that they represent and present. And maybe it was early, just after he was elected, but I don't know. It's not so clear cut to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Judah.
Well, first of all, I mean, Rabbi Wolpe is best known for questioning whether Sinai existed or not. And, but no, call me what you will. I feel it's the place of a rabbi to speak morals and ethics from the pulpit. And if we're separating children from their parents, no, it's something that should not be avoided. And just an experience I had this week, since we have Rain from Belgium and our new Stephanie from Germany. I was talking to this woman this week who belongs to my congregation, and my congregation is about 400, it's conservative. There's another congregation, about 400 Reform. The Reform one is very liberal. Mine is not, because sadly we have too many Republicans as members, in my opinion. And this woman left the Reform one. And I asked her why, and she said it was because of politics. And she said, it's not because I'm Republican or Democrat, it's just because I'm French. We French keep our politics to ourselves. So I just found that kind of amusing.
That is interesting. There might be a cultural aspect to it. You know, I do have some people of the millennial generation who I have been talking to who have told me about their frustration to find a synagogue that they can go to where they can just hear Torah and not have to hear about politics. This was something that perhaps I wasn't expecting to hear when I came to the Bay Area. Ben Chin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there's something to be said about our political situation. I mean, I think it's really hard because I think there was a time when you could make arguments about policy, and those seem to be pretty much irrelevant now. It's just two teams, really, that are dug in, and whose only real motivation is winning, right? So it's very hard to talk about, and of course they do have policies, but that's not what people are acting on, right? I think the vast majority of Sandy's kind of shaking her head, but I think we need to have some epistemological humility here. I think even what we say we think we believe, are we really motivated by that? Are we really motivated by something else? It's very hard to say. However, I do think there are real issues at play in which we as Jewish Americans may have a stake, right? The question of, should this country be a multi-ethnic democratic state with majority rule? That's a real question in which I think we have a stake, right? Or should we be a country in which you have a minority of white Christians essentially exercising power over the entire country? I think that's a question in which we have a stake. And I don't think you have to be necessarily, anti-Trump or anti-Republican to say they seem to be moving toward a strategy of, minority rule. They already have it, right? We have a president who wasn't elected by a majority. We have a Senate that was not elected by a majority. Those are just the facts, right? And you can point out those facts without necessarily maligning
So the overarching
goals.
morality then is democracy.
This is not even morality. This is just, I would say, survival, right? Do we, as Jewish Americans, have a real stake in how our political life is going to be constituted? We are a minority, right? And so I would think we've got a real dog in this hunt, right? If you want to think about the major locuses of power in our government being elected by a minority of the country that does not include us, right? That's just sort of a realpolitik kind of way of looking at it, which puts all kinds of policy and moral and ethical questions to the side, right? I do think there is another part of it, just in terms of, if we as American Jews want to continue to be represented, right? What does that mean, and what should we be advocating for?
Okay, David Bear, I have a response to that, Ben, but David Bear, you had your hand raised, so I saw you popped in here for a second. Did you want to come in?
It's always interesting listening to Ben. Ben, there was a lot packed in there, right? First of all, I disagree with you that we just have two people. That things are the same, right? The fundamental policy difference between the parties.
I'm not saying they're the same.
Okay.
Just saying that I'm just saying that our support for one party or the other may not entirely be based on real policies, even though those policies are very different.
Right. So part of the interesting thing is that so I have unfortunate relatives that are Trump supporters, but the issue is, then you end up with this interesting contradiction to say, okay, so they're Trump supporters because of a single issue about support for Israel, and their view that for all intents and purposes, he's advancing Mashiach. The fact that it's having irreparable harm to the United States does not enter into that argument, right? So there is a real difference. And, it's kind of because that feeds into what Irene was saying, which is at some point, the great challenge is that if we put ourselves back into 1933, 1935, right? Could you be friends with a Nazi? Now, we're not exactly there in the United States, but things are pretty radical, right? And if somebody can't have a rational discussion and a rational debate, then I think it becomes really difficult. But anyway.
Thank you, David. I did bring, if there is extra time, I did bring a sermon from 1933 because you name checked that year from Stephen Wise. So if we have time to get to that, we perhaps will get to that. But I want to go and I want everyone to see Rabbi Brous's response. So one of the emails that I received was, one of the emails that I received was Rabbi Brous's Rosh Hashanah sermon, which I watched. Very politically charged, for sure, very forceful. And she is, whereas, as Gary very astutely pointed out, David Wolpe is the head of the largest conservative synagogue in the country. Rabbi Brous is perhaps the head of the largest emergent Jewish synagogue in the country, both located in Los Angeles. And she is also a conservative rabbi. So let's take a look at how she is going to respond to, hold on one second. Here we go. Here is her response directly in the Jewish Journal to this letter. All right. There she is. What you call politics, we call Torah. 12 leaders were sent out. This is July 6, 2017. 12 leaders were sent to spy the land. 10 returned reporting fortified cities and giants. They warned that entering the land would be dangerous, even deadly. They spoke the truth, but they were punished severely, leading generations of rabbis to try to determine where exactly they went wrong. Commentators claim that they were tasked only with reporting, not editorializing, that their fault was in worrying how they were perceived by the inhabitants, that they should not have included any negative perceptions in their reports since the land was promised to the people as an inheritance by God. They were driven by fear. So obviously she's referring to the story of the spies in which Moses sends out the 12 spies into the land, and they come back and they say, we felt like grasshoppers and surely we looked like grasshoppers. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs brings a compelling read from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The spies' mistake was not that they were afraid of failure, they were afraid of success. Very little time had passed since they left Egypt. These men held the immediate and recent memory of the plagues of the miraculous split sea. God's cloud of glory protected them by day, and they were guided by a pillar of fire at night. They ate manna from heaven. They embodied spiritual intimacy with God. The spies knew what would happen if they entered the land. They'd be forced to fight battles, to sustain an army, to establish an economy and build out agricultural systems and establish rule of law. In Sachs's words, they were afraid of what would happen were they confronted with the challenge of mundane and material pursuits. In the desert, they could spend their entire lives learning Torah, lit by the radiance of the divine. There, they would be one more nation in a world of nations with the same kind of economic, social, and political problems that every nation has to deal with. That is Rabbi Sachs. This then is their crime, fear of success. They were holy men who didn't want to get caught up in the affairs of a marketplace. I recall the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who equates the Israelites' kvetch for water just days after the majestic miracle of the split sea with the Black community's insistence on housing without vermin, adequate schools, and decent jobs in the aftermath of the great achievements of the March on Washington and the Civil Rights Act. Those prosaic demands seem so trite, so drab, so banal, so devoid of magnificence, and yet the teaching of Judaism is the theology of the common deed. The Bible insists that God is concerned with everydayness, with the trivialities of life. The great challenge does not lie in organizing solemn demonstrations, but in how we manage the commonplace. The prophet's field of concern is not the mysteries of heaven, the glories of eternity, but the blights of society, the affairs of the marketplace. That's Heschel from 64. Throughout the Torah and the prophets, God's central preoccupation is the treatment of the poor and the most vulnerable. And it is honesty in business transactions and fairness in judgment. The predominant feature of the biblical pattern of life, according to Heschel, is unassuming, unheroic, inconspicuous piety, the sanctification of trifles, attentiveness to details. This past week, a dispute erupted in the rabbinic community when a colleague of mine, a brilliant and respected friend, issued a public call for keeping politics from the pulpit. All we hear all day long is politics. Can we not come to the shul for something different, something deeper? I want to know what my rabbi thinks of Jacob and Rachel, not of Pence and Pelosi. Tell me this, can one really claim that Torah is not inherently political document? This sacred scroll recounts the story of a band of slaves rising up before the most powerful and iconic ruler of the ancient world, demanding freedom and dignity. Is that not a political message? 4 of the 5 books of Torah tell the story of a journey of our people that took from slavery to freedom, from degradation to dignity, and lest we think that is an abstract, theoretical, or one-time journey. Along the way, they are commanded to establish a society that would be the antithesis in social policy and political reality of Egypt. We are charged to build in the promised land what Michael Walzer calls a counter-Egypt, a place in which human beings are free and tasked to honor their neighbor's dignity through impartial laws, fair judgments, and acts of compassion and love that reach above the letter of the law. Why do we unroll the Sefer Torah and parade around the sanctuary each week, reciting these words and repeating these stories? For nostalgia's sake? To recall old family tales? We read these sacred narratives to discern what it means to be Moses, Aaron, and Miriam in a world of pharaohs, what it means to be Tamar when you are invisibilized by a misogynistic legal system that undermines your very humanity, how to hold grief and anguish like Hannah, how to fight back injustice like Abraham, even when you are but dust and ashes. I understand why we might be supremely suspicious of religion on the public stage. For many years in this country and around the world, public discourse has been tainted by the most extreme and regressive version of religion. Religious leaders have used sacred text and their understanding of the will of God to justify racism, white supremacy, environmental destructions, attack on women's bodies, women's health, women's rights, and discrimination against LGBT people. The public face of religion has too often been hypocritical, exclusive, and oppressive. But we must not abdicate religion to religious extremists. The answer is not to decouple religion and politics, to claim that the affairs of the market, the cost and nature of healthcare for the poor, the heartless treatment of the immigrant and refugee, the fact that yet another police officer who shot a Black man, this time Philando Castile, was found not guilty. The reality that thousands of mostly people of color are stuck in jail because of a broken and discriminatory cash bail system. The fact that after a mass shooting like 2 this past week, gun laws are more likely to be loosened than tightened. To suggest that all of this is outside the scope of religion is to strip religion of its essence. Instead, we must reclaim religious leadership as moral leadership. It is faith leaders who can bring inclusion, forgiveness, equity, and equality, justice, and love to the forefront of this national conversation. A living wage, that's the business of the faith community. Mass incarceration, that's our business too. State legislatures disenfranchising Black voters with surgical precision, that too is our business. The promise to strip 24 million people of healthcare, that is the business of people of faith. Religion means nothing if it is not a response to the greatest moral crises and challenges of our day. As Rabbi Shai Held wrote this week, demanding that politics be kept out of the shul is like demanding that Torah be kept out of the shul. Remember Dr. King's piercing critique of the God-fearing ministers, whom he expected to find support during the civil rights struggle. Instead, he wrote, some have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders. He says, in the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities in the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic justice. I have heard many ministers say these are just social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. Perhaps some of our leaders, I'm going to move down, would prefer the path of the 10 spies who would rather dwell in the desert than dirty our hands with the business of building a just society. Perhaps we'd rather ruminate on Jacob and Rachel than be distracted or burdened by the gross abuse of power, racism, misogyny, lies, and hypocrisy from the highest of offices. Perhaps we'd rather not engage with growing authoritarianism that today threatens to undo our democracy. But there is another way. 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, defied the majority. They saw exactly what the others saw, but called the Israelites to face the inevitable challenges of a complex society with the spiritual tools of faith, hope, and love. We honor them not by telling their stories as entertainment, but by letting their stories guide and strengthen our own resolve to fight for what is right today. Gary Sokol has his hand raised.
Sure, you're shocked. I have to say, well, it's no secret. I mean, I discovered Rabbi Brous during this period of pandemic, and I've been studying with her regularly. And the same thing for Shai Held. Interestingly, Shai Held is probably the more radical, but that's in part because he is not a pulpit rabbi, so he does not have those restrictions. Those strictures. He actively calls out Trump. I have never heard Rabbi Brous mention Trump's name. And it really is her Torah that sustains me. I need to hear it. I mean, it's Lo b'shamayim hi, and she teaches to the issues of the day and what Torah has to say about them. And that may be political, but that's the world we live in, and it's a living, breathing document, and she makes it come to life for me, and it's the thing that helps maintain my sanity.
Thank you. Bert Meyer.
I have a question, being an old guy, not in tune. You used the phrase emergent congregation. I'm not sure what that means.
That's a trend that's been used in this century to refer to, I guess, ground roots up, community building that's not based off of pre-existing institutions. So there was
non-denominational.
Thank you, unaffiliated. Thank you, Judah. There was it comes from a non-denominational Christian emergent church and has been adopted by emergent synagogues as well.
And she founded hers on social justice, her community. So
Marcia.
Rabbi,
Sorry, Bert, yeah.
I didn't mean to cut anybody off. I think, again, it's always important to know what terms mean. Certainly what she said and what's been said here governs political in the broadest sense. But when you start getting into individual candidates and party politics, very complex. And if I may end with a quote from Tom Lehrer, everybody hates the Jews.
So, okay, so I guess then you would slightly disagree with Gary Simple. So Marcia Glantz?
Yeah, I think sort of agreeing with slightly with different people. I think that we get into trouble perhaps when we target certain individuals, certain politicians, certain political parties. However, for Torah to be relevant to us in our day, certain issues, I think, need to be highlighted by our Torah study. What good is religion if it doesn't have impact in your daily life?
Let me stop you for 1 second. One thing I want to ask. It seems to me, and I'm not a political pundit by any stretch of the imagination, that there's only one issue at play next Tuesday, right? It just seems to me there's only one issue at play next Tuesday, and that is, what do you think of this person, Donald Trump, right? Everything that has taken place in the past 6 months has been around, what do you think of this person, Donald Trump? So to decouple the issues from the personality, when it seems to me that this whole election is about the personality, is particularly challenging to do. Would you agree with that?
I think that actually people of thought have, it's sort of like, why do you not like Donald Trump? Besides the fact that he's a blowhard and what he says seems to be very divisive, because there are actually certain issues. Do you care about global warming? Do you believe it's real? Do you want the country to be addressing this issue? Do you believe that we've got to have a different immigration policy, or we have to have one at all? Do you want people to have health care? These are all specific issues. And when I vote, really, if I am a careful, thoughtful person, I want to be voting, having these issues that have real consequences, specific consequences on my life and other people's lives, to be the reason I'm voting for one person over another. It's not what your party stands for. Is, okay, how have you been acting? What actions have you taken in the spheres that I care about? And I think that religiously, it can be appropriate without throwing arrows and sticks at any political person or political party to address these specific issues that can be addressed by Torah explanations. You can read the Torah and you can have any position you want. You can pick and choose. You can cherry pick the Torah and find a defense. That, unfortunately, but that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Anybody we haven't heard from? Stuart.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the issue of when the rabbi should speak out, when the rabbi should keep quiet, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, it's not so complicated. First of all, not all rabbis are created equal. Not all congregations are created equal. And congregations select their rabbis, and rabbis select their congregations when they are compatible. And I think it's very important for congregants to correct a rabbi if the rabbi is speaking out in such a way that you want to say to the rabbi, Rabbi, that is not consistent with the identity of this congregation. And the person may be accurate. And if they are accurate, I think the rabbi has to do a little soul searching and say, am I compatible with this congregation? So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. And the second thing is that I mentioned this last week when we were discussing it. We're using the term politics much too loosely. And some of us are trying to identify what the issues are that encompass politics and what the issues are that encompass morality. But to me, it seems not so complicated. In other words, if a leader in the community is convicted of rape or theft or murder or some other obvious Ten Commandment transgression, and that person is a leader, well, I think the rabbi has to speak out and say, that is against everything we believe. You can't do that and think you're setting a good example. Now, in some congregations, going back to what I said earlier about compatibility between the rabbi and the congregation, in some congregations, the rabbi would not be allowed to speak out that way because they would say, oh, you're speaking about the mayor of our city. You can't get involved in politics in this congregation. We don't discuss politics here. And the rabbi says, I'm not discussing politics. The person, has been convicted, of a serious crime. I don't want anyone in my congregation to believe that that's the example we want to set for us or our children. But then again, if by saying that in that congregation, they're so sensitive that that's considered politics, well, then the rabbi shouldn't speak out. So It really depends on the rabbi and the congregation.
I agree. Ellen, I haven't heard from you. Yeah. Hold on. I still can't hear you. You got to unmute.
I'm listening. I don't have an opinion I'm ready to share.
Okay, that's fine. Ben Chin, sorry.
Yeah, so I've got another question, maybe from a different angle. And this may contradict what I've said before. I reserve the right to contradict myself. So I think a meaningful question is, what kind of community do we want to build, right? And I love Sharon Brous. I think she's a tremendous rabbi, and I agree with almost everything she says. But I do think at ICAR, her congregation, there is a sense that she's preaching to the choir. I think that it is essential that we build spaces and identities that don't break along party lines. I think it's very sad that pretty much everything in our society has now polarized across partisan divisions. There is almost no position or opinion you can have that doesn't place you in one of those boxes very, very clearly. I think that's a great shame, and I think it's destructive to American society. Frankly, it wasn't always that way. And I think one big difference between Rabbi Wolpe and Rabbi Brous is that he was born in 1958 and she was born in 1973. Right? He was born when Eisenhower was president. And she came of age, with Reagan, right? And those are two just politically just very different realities. And so I think it is important to have a space where those team identities are not the most important thing. And I think Judaism gives us an opportunity to have an identity, a tribal identity even, that supersedes those divisions. And maybe that creates a situation in which those kinds of divisions maybe aren't as all-encompassing, which I think would be a healthy thing.
All right, thank you. Anybody who has yet to speak, if you're on also, if you're off, I see Randy. Randy, I'm going to call on you next, but I also, everyone, maybe if you have your camera off and you want to get in here, you can raise your hand. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak. And Stephanie, also, if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand and I'll call on you as well. Randy.
So, Rabbi, this is a great discussion. To me, it's very interesting that you used Sharon Brous as sort of a counterexample. And I'm wondering how we would be talking if you used a very conservative rabbi who would be talking about, say, precepts of freedom and how let's say the right hopes to achieve freedom in certain ways, right? By unbridled capitalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If, in other words, if that rabbi's take on the Torah would be so different from Rabbi Brous's. Also, just FYI, if we're putting people in context, you know, Sharon Brous, we know her politics. We also know that she's, at least, you know, very connected to the Democratic mayor of LA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Full disclosure, I'm an old hippie liberal. I grew up in the 60s. I was, you know, my politics are very, very left wing. But it seems that the more I talk with friends of mine on the right, and I still have some, I don't know, friends on the left have said, oh my God, if people on the right only understood our point of view or something like that. No, none of that's true. People on the right understand our point of view. They simply disagree with it. And so I guess I find Rabbi Wolpe's exhortation like a little refreshing at this point. So anyway, but I'm serious. I'm serious. You know, I don't know. Do we think of Rabbi Wolpe as some conservative? I don't know.
Oh yeah, no, Rabbi Wolpe. I mean, what you mean? No, I chose two what I would say are pretty mainstream conservative rabbis. You know, both of them, I think, at one point or the other, were the #1 rabbi on the Newsweek list, which we can all.
No, I mean, do we think of him as politically? Do we think of him as politically conservative? I don't know his politics at all.
I would never. I have no idea where the spectrum would begin in San Francisco to figure out whether or not where he would fit on the spectrum. But I would say he's pretty moderate. I mean, I always thought of him as a centrist. Okay. But what do I know? He doesn't talk about politics from the pulpit. So my guess is he's always pretty moderate. But that's been my impression. Judah.
Yeah, and the idea of, you know, looking at ourselves as a tribe, as a united tribe, and you know, I'm in this Facebook group of mainly Orthodox Jews, mainly from New York, who are surrounded by Republicans. And this discussion in the past few days has been like, all of a sudden, like, I don't even know if I feel I'm in the same religion as these people. You know, with the tactics that the Orthodox are doing in New York against COVID and for Trump and whatever, and it's like such a schism with morality and ethics between these two Orthodox Jewish groups.
Why do you think it, Judah, do you have any sense, or anybody here, why the fundamentalists, the Orthodox, I mean, in the Orthodox Jews disproportionately, majority of them support Trump, you know, evangelical Christians, majority of them, I think, support Trump. What is it about sort of fundamentalism? Do you think that, is it about authoritarianism? What do you think it is?
As somebody said, it's about Israel. They're one issue, it's one issue, and also for the evangelicals. And I mean, it's funny, Trump himself said, all this Israel stuff I'm giving to the Christians. I mean, that's his base. But so big deal, the capital's Jerusalem, when, you know, all the other horrible stuff, you know, from Kushner this morning, Trump took COVID away from the scientists. I mean, these things just can't be ignored.
Thank you.
It's authoritarianism. There have been
I mean, I think this sort of
no.
Oh, go wait. Hold on.
Wait. There have been studies that have shown that those with a preference for you know, authoritarian type leadership favor, you know, tend to be Republicans. And I'm not saying that, you know, who are in favor of authoritarian rule, but who feel more comfortable with a stronger, you know, authority embodied in a person, And I think that's consistent with the approach of the Orthodox into how they see their leadership.
Yeah, so Sandy has a good point in there, which I think I just want to emphasize. Yes, it also has a lot to say about who's funding those churches and those synagogues, 100%. I do want to hear from Betsy, and then I will get to you, Bert. Betsy.
Like a good friend.
The only comment I want to make is, we have our connection to Richmond Torah Center and people there. And it's painful because we really feel unconnected. First of all, I'm sure that this is true in Israel as well, but a large part of the Russian emigre community who chooses to be religious, for sure, maybe even if they're not religious, but of the Orthodox community that we know, and that's most of the people at Richmond Torah Center are Russians, most of who became religious since they've come here. They like strong men. They're very worried about socialism and communism. They hated the previous administration. They hate the Democratic Party because they feel it's too leaning socialist. They're very afraid of it as a direction in the country. And they're just very right-leaning. And the other thing is that for many of them, more than the country we live in, the lack of separations of power, the lack of separation of church and state that's coming here, what they care about is Israel, and they see him as good. And my feeling is he could say anything he wanted to, he'll get their vote, and he could flip it in the next 4 years if, God forbid, he's elected. And he could do whatever he wants. He could put Israel up for sale to the closest Arab country. It doesn't matter because his vote isn't there. He's not there about the Jews in Israel, in my opinion. He might be there about the evangelicals.
Yeah, what I wanted to ask you, Betsy, and I stopped myself before I asked you. I was going to ask you, what's the conversation like at the Kiddushes? And then I realized that that's
we're not.
I know.
We haven't been there.
That's
no. I mean, no.
No,
even way
that was
before.
my point. I was going to reflexively ask you about what the dialogue was like around the Kiddush table.
Long
obviously,
before,
isn't happening.
David is able to play devil's advocate with some of the people. They do push-pull, but it's just like, I mean, it's been outrageous to us since Trump was elected, and it is only worse because of the things he did. It's one thing to have elected him in 2016, leaning toward a strong man, leading just simply to the Republican candidate, whatever. But now it's disgusting for us. And it's really, we have some good friends. We can't talk.
Let me ask you one last question, and it might be a hard one to answer. Would you like the rabbi to call them out more from the pulpit?
He's not capable. He's not the kind of person who would do that. That's not what Rabbi Hecht's thing is.
And that goes back to
it's not like he gives strong sermons.
That goes back to Stuart's point. You get the rabbi that fits in the community. You get the rabbi that fits for that.
He does Torah. He does Torah, and he does whatever Chabad does. I don't know how many Chabad rabbis kind of are more outspoken on anything. I have no idea because he's really who we know. But basically, I mean, he toes us straight up.
I guess what I wanted to know, I guess what I was curious to know, and it's an unfair question, was do you think he has a religious or moral obligation to call out his lay people? And that's an impossible question to ask you, so I'm not going to ask you to answer it. Bert.
Well, a couple of things. One, in somewhat in response or agreeing with Betsy, but I think we have to remember Russians and others, they've lived in a socialist system. So to say that they are really afraid of it, they know a lot more like what it can do than maybe we as Americans do. The other thing, as far as the Orthodox, I mean, I think again, and I sort of feel like a reformed, far left or like a drug addict who's reformed. We really have to realize how anti-Jewish a lot of the progressive section of the left is. It's not just anti-Israel, one could argue, I would, in fact, that anti-Zionism is just the latest form of anti-Judaism, just like anti-Semitism even, doing it on racial grounds was in its day sort of a cleaning up of just pure anti-Judaism. So I think with the Orthodox, especially, for whom not just authoritarianism, but religion is a key part of their life, they are really afraid of what would happen if you got a totally secular society. And because, you know, Protestants are going to control, white Protestants are going to control this country. This idea that minorities are coming up and I've been hearing that for so many years and it hasn't happened. White Protestants still control this country. And white Protestants have taken over the left. When the leading exponents of the left come from Ivy League schools. Now, again, in reference to sort of what Ben said, I was born in 1940. I mean, I know, you know, the anti-Semitism of, say, the Ivy League schools, it's always been there, maybe for a brief period right after the war it was gone, but it's there just in different forms. And I think we have to, as Jews, bear that in mind. It's not that we have to vote for Trump. I mean, I would never vote for Trump, but we do have to bear in mind that that's the case. Also, Rabbi, in reference to something you said, that Trump is the whole issue. Well, Trump is not the whole issue in California. I mean, he's not going to win in California, no matter what. We do
Correct.
have,
Yeah, no, I'm talking on the national.
but I'm sure you have, but when you look at the California ballot, there are some very controversial issues.
I'm so happy you brought that up. I was gonna ask Marcia or Sandy, what should I vote on 22? Like, what does Judaism teach me to vote on 22?
That's a very tough one. I mean, that depends on, I mean, if I go to I voted for it because I talked to a lot of drivers and they really, I mean, the gig economy is but I mean, being an old labor
slave labor, that's not Jewish. We don't like slave wages either. So that's not good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough one. I had a long discussion with my daughter who voted the other way, but we agreed that it's a very, very difficult issue. But Rabbi Wolpe, for instance, referred to bail. That's on the California ballot. Again, you have, you know,
removing the ban on affirmative action.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff beyond Trump, because as I say, Trump is going to lose in California, even if we all voted for Trump, which we wouldn't.
That's right.
But I don't know that we take a stand on everything. I've noticed, for example, the JCRC has taken stands on 15, which is the removing the property tax restrictions on big corporations, on 16, which is removing the ban on affirmative action, and 17, which allows prisoners who are on parole to vote. So those all have underpinnings in our tradition, I think. I mean, and that's the JCRC has analyzed that.
Yeah.
So
I would hate to be in the position to have to go through each of those and decide which one Judaism would advocate towards. I mean, that would be an impossible job.
Right. And 22, I don't think Judaism has much to offer. I mean, if you want to support the greed of Lyft and Uber and all those companies.
Hard to tell if it puts money in people's pockets or it keeps money. It's just impossible to tell.
It's a bad proposition. It's not hard to tell. I mean, the drivers are screwed either way.
That's right. That's the bottom line. The drivers are screwed either way. Stuart, and we have, I want to get to everyone. And I do have a reply from Rabbi Wolpe, but that's going to come after I hear from all of us. Stuart first.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize something that Bert said, you know, and the question you asked was, why do these Christian fundamentalists and why do these ultra-Orthodox communities favor Trump? And, you know, what Bert pointed out was it's not so much that they favor Trump. It's not that they like him. They're frightened of the alternative. And that's what demagoguery is. If the alternative is our cities and streets will be burning and people will plunder, if the alternative is crosses will be removed from public squares and you'll be forbidden from ever to say Merry Christmas to someone. You have to be more secular, you know, during the Christmas season. I mean, I think these you know, religious people, I don't think they're analyzing things very carefully, and they believe what the demagogue says, namely that the opponent will completely do away with your way of life. And that's why, even though, you take a look at his moral conduct, you take a look at his day-to-day activities, take a look at him holding a Bible upside down, in front of a church, in Washington, they're not fools. They know he's not religious like they are. They know he doesn't have deep moral underpinnings. What they do know, what they think they know, is the alternative is horrible.
Right. It's a cold political calculus. It's an ends justify the means on their side as much as it is on any other side. Marcia.
Well, there's two issues here. One is this use of religion, using religion to for demagoguery, as Stuart was talking about, and to basically tell lies about your opponent, and incite unrest among your opponents. And I know that that's one issue. And I've been fond of saying before, when I've talked to people at shul, when the rabbi may have said something that someone didn't like, or there was not necessarily just oh, he's doing too much outreach to gays and I don't care about them, or too much, this group, I don't care about them. And I'd say, well, everything isn't about me. I can still be part of this community if everything isn't about me. I mean, just enough of this stuff is about me. And I can hear what they're saying with other opinions. It does, maybe it'll change me, maybe it won't, but it doesn't hurt me. I am not being hurt by this outreach to other people who are not me, whether it's an outreach to people with little kids or it's an outreach to gays and lesbians. It's not all about me. That's one thing. That's one thing. The other thing is this issue of taking, like California, we vote on everything, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because when I read the ballot and I read the actual small print and stuff, I'm not sure I know what they're talking about. And half of the things are written in such a way that they're not written very well. Or they're written in such a way that half of it I really don't like, and the other half I do like. So, what do I do with this? And that's not a Democratic or Republican thing. That's usually an interest group thing. Some group has an interest and they've written something to magnify the things that are good for them, and they don't care if it's not written very well. And I don't think a rabbi in the pulpit should get messed up with things that are not written very well. And that's where your Prop 22 and your Prop 23 come in, which are not global initiatives,
but it's like real people,
where there's a Torah-based thing you can argue.
It's real people. We're the lives of real people and the employment of real people. Stephanie, you were raising your hand.
Yeah, I basically just wanted to say that, I think it all comes down to people are choosing their own priorities, and I don't think it's very easy to navigate that. So I have a lot of liberal Jewish friends who had have liberal values, but they had a big problem with Bernie back in 2016 because they had a deep connection to Israel, and he wasn't favoring Israel enough, but they also don't like Trump. But I think it's a very hard topic, because I feel then somebody, for example, me, I'm a foreign national. I actually was trying to go home, see my family. I canceled that trip because I might not be allowed to return under president proclamations, and it's affecting me, and therefore people who know me are a lot more on that side with me. But I feel like it's so far removed from a lot of people. They don't know anybody who's stuck in a detention center or has any relatives who is. And yeah, I don't know. And when it comes to does politics belong in the synagogue? Yeah, I've been reading a lot more of the Torah, and I feel that it's in itself a political story. It's full of politics and history, and so I don't know, it's like the second text we read said, it's not, you're just not reading it for anecdotal reasons just to hear about these people's stories, right? You're trying to see what can we take from this and how can we apply it to our lives and our current situation. And I feel if you don't do that, in my opinion, I don't know what the point would be in reading these stories, just having reading a story.
Yeah, I guess it would be like a virtual reality that we would all be playing in, that would have no impact on the rest of our lives. I want to close want to close with Rabbi Wolpe's reply to Rabbi Brous and a number of other rabbis. So I had brought some other rabbis with me here, well, not with me, but their writings with me. There were a number of them who disagreed with Rabbi Wolpe, but here is his reply to all of them. Response to my critics. I thank my colleagues and friends Rick Jacobs and Noah Farkas and many others who wrote in response to my opinion piece, Why I Keep Politics Off the Pulpit, in the June 9th edition of the Jewish Journal. I offer the following points. All right. By the way, the points I will say that this week and last week we have discussed. Number one, moral issues are almost always political stances I agree with, and partisan politics are stances with which I differ. Self-righteousness is a potent drug, and politics has enough of it without adding religion, as our founding fathers knew. The passion with which you hold a conviction says absolutely nothing about its correctness, nothing. Even-handedness feels tepid and uninspiring, but for that reason, it is all the more important. We demonize each other by pulpit-pounding proclamations of Torah-true positions. Using the rabbinate to promote policies is exploiting one form of authority to enforce another, too. Every rabbi should preach values, of course. Values are not policies and not embodied in politicians. This past Shabbat, I spoke about Judaism and the sin of racism. Policies to combat racism are a more complex matter. There are studies, statistics, successes, failures, in other words, solutions best left to those who master the field and know something, and to our capacity to argue as citizens. I've spoken and written about immigration, war, poverty, and other issues to clarify values, but not to endorse policies. Congregants often know more about specific policy issues than I. Rabbinic training does not provide the gavel to judge between economic contentions of John Kenneth Galbraith and Milton Friedman. Gun control measures, however much I may favor them, were not outlined in the story of Korach or in the book of Proverbs. Colleagues who miraculously locate the policies of their party in each week's Torah portion are no more credible than so-called Kabbalists who find in the Torah's codes predictions of the future or confirmations of the past. Number three, I've asked several correspondents a simple question and received not one satisfactory answer. What policies do you support on major questions that differ with what you would believe if you were not a religious Jew? If Judaism supports all the policies you believe anyway, can't you be at least a little suspicious that your policies are guiding your Torah and not your Torah leading to your policies? 4, campaign and politics are inherently divisive and never more than now. If as a rabbi you have a perfectly homogeneous shul, then I congratulate you on your frictionless life. But I have too often heard of people leaving shuls feeling politically disenfranchised by the rabbi's preaching. Synagogues should not be tax-exempt campaign offices. 5, yes, I know Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Honestly, I do. But issues like slavery and civil rights are very rare, once in a generation. And invoking them for everything from social welfare policy to Dodd-Frank to the methods of vetting immigrants is both dishonest and a cheapening of a great moral legacy. If you are using the March on Selma to religiously validate your views on the minimum wage, shame on you. Number 6, many people privately ask about my political views, and I'm happy to answer, but not from the bima. As a rabbi, my task is to bless, to teach values and texts and ideas and rituals, to comfort, cajole, to listen and learn, to grow in spirit along with my congregants, to usher them through the transitions of life, to create a cohesive community, to defend the people in the land of Israel, and to reinforce what matters most. The great questions of life are not usually political ones. When political questions do arise, the rabbi should clarify the Jewish values involved and expect congregants to decide which candidates and policies best fulfill those values. Aren't there enough disastrous examples in the world where clergy set public policy for us to be humble about our political wisdom? Okay, so that is his reply. I didn't intend to give him the last word, so even though we're over, if anybody wants to reply to that, I'm going to give you a chance.
I don't think he does himself any favors with that reply.
Why? So you tell me, Ben, because in fact, I thought he sounded a little like you there. So I'm curious to hear why you say that. And then Dara, I see, wants to say something as well.
Well, I mean, not everything he says there is wrong, but I mean, his statement about Rabbi Heschel, I mean, he seems to be implying that the civil rights struggle has been done and dusted.
Over.
That's clearly not true, right? And yes, I mean, there are different policy solutions for inequities that exist, but for him to essentially pretend that they don't exist and that this is not a live issue that we should care about. Same with immigration, right? To say that we have nothing to say about the welcoming of refugees, right? I think he's weakening his own case here.
I didn't love his use of Heschel either. I mean, I didn't realize there was a scale in which we place all moral stances upon. That rubbed me the wrong way as well. Dara.
I just wanted to say that the tone of this letter bothered me a lot, and he seems rather glib. He's a very liberal use of alliteration and sort of snarky sarcasm. And yeah, it didn't, it just seems like he's dodging the question again and doing it in like, I can out argue you kind of a way.
Yeah.
And it just didn't, like you say, it rubbed me the wrong way.
Irene.
I didn't understand initially that he was opposed to providing a religious opinion on major issues like Trump. I liked what he had said originally, but I don't like the fact that you remain silent. We know what that does. If you remain silent.
You thought his first letter was better than his second, and as Ben
Much
said,
better.
he did himself no favors by further articulating his message, and he also sort of rubbed people the wrong way by the argumentative style.
In addition, something that Stephanie said, which I really liked, is the fact that Torah can be a means to politics, just as politics can be a means to Torah, as long as it stays with the realm of morality and whatever. Yeah.
Thank you, Irene. So Gary, I think you're going to have the last word, and unless Betsy, you're still raising your hand. That's an old hand. So Gary, you're going to have the last word here.
I'll say two things. I mean, first of all, the one part is, I mean, Torah can and must inform certain of our positions. We can't turn a blind eye when it's there. But it doesn't, as we've said, there's not every proposition is informed by Torah. And it's the challenge of a rabbi to make those distinctions for us. At the same time, we need to hear those. I mean, I need to hear those things. And I want to give an anecdote, which was fascinating when we go back to the fundamentalists. I'm not sure why I had this dinner, but I was seated at a dinner next to the person who was the liaison between Agudat Yisrael in New York and the New York City Democratic Party. And he was not, I think maybe he was an Orthodox Jew, but he was, I think he may have been a secular Jew. And he told a story about one mayoral candidate going to Agudat Yisrael and talking to him about abortion. And he was horrified. And he goes, they may be fundamentalists, but they're not fundamentalist Christians. Agudat Yisrael in the Haredi community, they marry close relatives and everything, and they have a lot of genetic defects. And abortion is something that access to abortion is very important to them. And they said the things you've got to talk to them about, they're worried about their school funding. That is their primary issue. And as long as you meet them, that you're going to let them have their independence with their schools and their school funding, they will be supportive of you. But do not talk about abortion.
Yeah,
so,
interesting. You mentioned independence. Maybe that's another impulse in addition to authoritarianism that motivates some of these communities. They want to remain independent. They want to continue to have the free exercise of religion. So thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful conversation. I thought this was great, and I thought that the texts provide. Thank you to Rabbis Wolpe and Rabbi Brous. Thank you for giving us this wonderful dialogue that we can enter into as a community. And yes, we'll be here next Wednesday at noon. I'm guessing we're going to have what to talk about. We will be continuing the conversation of politics in the pulpit. And I look forward to seeing everyone. You're welcome to join me tomorrow morning, where we are going to discuss this week's Parsha, which is Lech Lecha. All right, take care. Have a good afternoon, everybody.